Growing up, I never thought much about being adopted. I was just a little girl, and to me, Liam was always my brother. He was older by a few years, and I looked up to him in a way that only younger siblings can. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, and always made sure I felt included in everything. To me, we were just like any other brother and sister, even though I knew I wasn't his biological sibling. But as I got older, something started to change between us. It was subtle at first, almost like a shift I couldn't quite pinpoint. At first, I thought it was nothing. Liam was just going through a phase, maybe dealing with things I didn't fully understand. He was getting older, more independent, and I figured he was just pulling away like older siblings do. But the distance kept growing. He stopped spending as much time with me, and when he did, he seemed distracted, like his mind was elsewhere. At first, I tried not to let it bother me. After all, we were both growing up me into a teenager and him into an adult. People change, right? It was natural for siblings to drift apart as they got older, I thought. But then came the moments that made me uneasy, the moments I couldn't shake off. When he looked at me, it was different. His gaze lingered longer than usual, and there was something about the way he studied me that made my skin crawl. It wasn't like the brotherly look I was used to, the one that said, "I'm here for you." No, this was different. I couldn't describe it in words, but I felt it in my gut, a warning sign that something wasn't right. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Liam had always been protective, always looking out for me, so maybe that was what I was picking up on. Maybe he was just concerned about me growing up too fast, or maybe it was something else entirely that I didn't understand. I kept telling myself that he was still my brother and no matter what, I could trust him. But with each passing day, those moments of discomfort grew stronger. It wasn't just the looks. It was the way he started acting around me, more possessive, more controlling. He'd start making comments about who I was spending time with, questioning why I was hanging out with certain friends. He'd ask me where I was going and who I was with more than seemed necessary. At first, I thought he was just being a protective older brother worried about me getting into trouble, but it started to feel more like surveillance than care. It felt suffocating, like I couldn't breathe without him knowing every detail of my life, and still I convinced myself that it was just his way of being a good brother. But the more he changed, the more I began to feel that something was off. It wasn't like any sibling relationship I had seen. Most of my friends had brothers who were annoying or distant, but they didn't feel trapped by them. I started to feel trapped by Liam. It was as if he was trying to control my life, my choices, even my friends. I started distancing myself from him, trying to maintain a sense of independence, but it only seemed to make him more determined to keep a hold on me. And I hated that feeling, being watched, being controlled by someone who was supposed to be my protector, not my jailer. Still, I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was happening. All I knew was that things were changing and it wasn't for the better. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the person I trusted most in the world, the person I thought would always have my back, could ever make me feel so small, so trapped. One evening, things took an unexpected turn. I had just finished dinner and was heading up to my room when I heard Liam call my name from the hallway. It was a normal evening, or so I thought, but there was something in his tone that made me pause. It wasn't just the usual friendly invitation to hang out or chat. There was an edge to it, something sharp and insistent. I didn't think much of it at first. He was my older brother, after all. Why would I be worried about a simple conversation? When I entered his room, I was surprised to see that he'd locked the door behind me. It was strange, but I figured he was just being quirky, maybe setting up a surprise or trying to have some private sibling moment. He'd always been protective, so locking the door seemed normal at first, but something felt off. The air was thick, tense, and the usual warmth I felt around him was nowhere to be found. Liam stood in front of me, his expression unreadable. There was no smile, no teasing glint in his eyes. Instead, he looked serious, almost cold. I didn't know what to make of it. My mind raced, trying to figure out what could have changed in the few minutes it took me to walk upstairs. Before I could ask him what was going on, he stepped forward, grabbed my arms, and pushed me toward the chair in the corner of his room. I tried to pull away, startled by the suddenness of it all, but he was too strong. His grip tightened, and there was no softness in his touch, no brotherly care. I felt panic creep up my throat. "Liam, what are you doing?" I managed to choke out, but he didn't respond. Instead, he started tying my hands to the chair. It wasn't like he was trying to hurt me, but it was the kind of thing you would do to someone you wanted to keep captive. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of the situation. This wasn't the Liam I knew. This wasn't the brother who had taught me how to ride a bike, or who'd laughed with me on late nights. "Liam, stop," I shouted, my voice trembling as the knots around my wrists grew tighter. My heart raced faster and I could feel the room closing in on me. I kicked my feet against the chair, desperately trying to break free, but he was much stronger than I was. The ropes dug into my skin, and the panic only grew. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears as my mind spiraled, questioning everything I thought I knew about him. Why was he doing this? What had changed so suddenly? What had happened to the brother I trusted? His silence only made everything worse. There were no words of explanation, no reassurance. Just the sound of him moving around the room, the scraping of chairs and the rustling of clothes as he tightened the ropes around my wrists. My breath quickened, and I couldn't stop shaking. My body felt paralyzed with fear as I realized that I couldn't move, couldn't escape. My brother, the person I had always felt safe with, had just locked me in this room, and was now holding me captive. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. All I wanted was for him to tell me what was going on, to explain why he was acting this way. But there was nothing. His face was blank, devoid of any emotion that might help me understand. I was lost in a wave of confusion, fear, and betrayal. This was no longer my brother. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of doing something I never imagined. I struggled against the ropes, tears welling up in my eyes as I realized that the person who had always promised to protect me was now the one causing me the most fear. How could he do this to me? How could he betray my trust in such a devastating way? All I wanted was for it to stop, but the longer I sat there, the more I realized that there was no way out. As I sat there, tied to the chair, my heart pounded in my chest. Liam had stopped talking, stopped moving around the room, and now it felt like the silence was louder than anything else. I kept trying to pull my arms free, my body shaking, but the ropes were tight, cutting into my skin. My mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. How had we gone from being close siblings to this? How had everything gotten so twisted so quickly? I was still trying to wrap my head around the situation when Liam stepped closer. His eyes were colder now, more distant. His presence seemed to fill the room in a way that made it feel smaller, suffocating. I wanted to ask him why, wanted to scream at him to stop, to tell me what was going on. But my throat felt dry, like the words wouldn't come out right, like anything I said wouldn't matter. He didn't speak for a long time, and the silence between us stretched on, unbearably thick. I couldn't even look at him properly. Every time I tried, my eyes would dart away, unable to meet his gaze. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. This wasn't supposed to be happening. This wasn't the brother I knew. Finally, Liam broke the silence, but his voice sounded different, colder. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his tone flat and emotionless. I didn't even have a chance to respond before he continued, his words cutting through the still air. "You don't belong here. You're not even really family." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My mind couldn't process what he was saying. What did he mean? I wasn't family. I was his sister, his little sister, wasn't I? The thought made my stomach churn. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but nothing came out. My lips felt numb, my tongue thick in my mouth. Liam's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer again, his gaze now more intense, more piercing. "You've always been a reminder of that, haven't you? A reminder that you don't really belong here, that you're not really part of the family." His words were like daggers, each one digging deeper, twisting the knife with every syllable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The anger and bitterness in his voice was something I hadn't heard before. It was like a different person was standing in front of me, someone who had taken my brother's place. I wanted to say something, anything to make him stop, to make him realize how wrong he was. But all that came out was a quiet sob. My whole body shook with the weight of what he was saying. Could this really be happening? Could the brother I had trusted so completely, the one who had always been there for me, really feel this way? The thought of it was almost too much to bear. Liam didn't seem to care about the tears streaming down my face. He just stood there, staring at me, almost as if he were trying to figure something out. There was no compassion in his eyes, no hint of the person I had grown up with. This new version of Liam felt like a stranger to me, someone cold and unforgiving. I tried to look at him, to make some kind of connection, but all I saw was a wall between us, one that I wasn't sure could ever be torn down. "I'm just doing what's best," he said, his voice low but firm, as though convincing himself of his own words. "You don't understand what it's like, being in my position. But I can't keep pretending like everything's normal." The more he spoke, the less I recognized him. The Liam I had known, the one who had cared for me, who had been my protector, was gone. In his place was someone who seemed determined to hurt me, to break whatever bond we once shared. His betrayal was too much to take in, and as I sat there tied to that chair, I realized the truth. The brother I had loved, the one I had trusted, was no longer someone I could rely on, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. When I finally managed to break free from the ropes and run out of Liam's room, my mind was racing, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I rushed to find our parents, desperate for an explanation, for anything that could make sense of the nightmare I had just experienced. I thought maybe they could talk to Liam, figure out what was wrong, make him stop. But nothing could have prepared me for what they were about to say. I found my mom in the living room, her face lit up by the soft glow of the lamp. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment I thought everything would be okay. But the moment she saw the look on my face, her expression changed. Her eyes went wide, full of confusion and concern, but it quickly shifted to something else, something darker. Before I could even speak, she asked me what had happened, her voice trembling. It felt like she already knew, but I wasn't ready to admit what had just taken place. I blurted it out. "Liam, he tied me up. He wouldn't let me go. He was different, Mom. Something's wrong." My voice shook with every word, and I could barely hold back the tears. I was so scared, so confused, and I needed her to understand. I needed her to make sense of it all. Mom's face paled, and she didn't respond right away. It was like the world had gone quiet, and for a moment I thought I might have imagined the entire thing. But then, as she took a shaky breath, she looked at me with a strange, distant expression. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, almost resigned. We sat down in the living room, and she explained the truth that had been hidden from me my entire life. I wasn't just adopted. I wasn't just some child who had been brought into their family. No, it was much more complicated than that. My father wasn't my biological father. Liam wasn't my biological brother. I was the product of an affair, a family secret that no one had ever told me about. I felt the ground beneath me shift as my mother spoke. I couldn't process it. The shock hit me so hard that I had to blink a few times to make sure I had heard her correctly. My entire life, everything I had known, was suddenly upended. It wasn't just that Liam wasn't my biological brother, it was the realization that the entire foundation of my identity had been built on a lie. Mom tried to explain it gently, but the words felt sharp, like knives cutting through the air. "Your father wasn't the man you thought he was," she said softly. He had an affair years ago, and you were the result of that. Liam, he doesn't know how to handle it. He feels confused, angry." I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I felt like I was suffocating. All I could think about was Liam's face, his cold, distant stare. Everything he'd done, all the strange, controlling behavior, it suddenly made sense in the worst way possible. He had known. He knew we weren't really siblings, and it twisted something inside him. Something that I couldn't understand, but that I felt deep in my bones. He had never seen me as a sister, not really. To him, I was a constant reminder of a family secret, a wound that he never knew how to heal. As my mom continued to explain, I could barely hear her. The words felt distant, like they were coming from somewhere far away. I kept thinking about Liam, about what he'd said, how he told me I didn't belong. I hadn't understood it at the time, but now it was all too clear. He had resented me, resented that I was part of this family, that I was a constant reminder of a painful truth he couldn't escape. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why they hadn't told me sooner, why they had kept this secret for so long. But instead, I just sat there in silence, numb and broken. The truth had shattered me in a way I wasn't prepared for. My family, the people I trusted, had kept something so important from me, and now everything was ruined. My sense of self, my trust in those closest to me, it was all gone, replaced with this painful reality that I couldn't undo. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to move forward. All I knew was that the person who had once been my brother, who had been the one I looked up to, was now someone I couldn't even recognize. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, confusion, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I tried to talk to my parents about everything that had happened with Liam, but their words felt hollow, like they didn't fully understand what I was going through. They apologized, of course, but it didn't feel like enough. How could anyone apologize for something so huge, something so life-altering? They were my parents, but in that moment they didn't have the answers I needed. I didn't even know what the answers were. All I knew was that I felt like a stranger in my own life. Liam, meanwhile, had disappeared. He wasn't at home much anymore, and when he was, he avoided me completely. It was like we were strangers, like the bond we'd shared for so long had just evaporated overnight. I couldn't bring myself to confront him, to ask him why he did what he did, why he had hurt me in the way he had. The idea of facing him again felt impossible. I couldn't look at him without seeing the cold, distant version of him that had tied me to that chair, that had torn apart everything I thought I knew about our relationship. But the worst part was the emptiness, the void that had opened up in my life after the truth came out. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Not in my family, not with Liam, not even with myself. The person I had always trusted, the person who was supposed to look out for me, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And my parents, they had kept the secret for so long. They never told me the truth about who I really was, and now it felt like my entire identity had been built on a lie. I spent days alone in my room trying to process everything. I thought about the life I had known, the memories with Liam that now felt tainted. I couldn't remember the good times without feeling sick, without wondering if they were all just part of some twisted illusion. Had I ever really been close to him? Or had it always been one-sided, with me completely unaware of the resentment brewing underneath? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like I had been living in some kind of fantasy world. My friends tried to reach out to me, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to them. How could I explain what was happening? How could I tell them that my brother, the person I thought was the most important in my life, had turned into someone I feared? How could I explain that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie? It felt like too much to put into words. Eventually, I spoke to my mom again. She tried to comfort me, but there was nothing she could say that would make things right. The damage had been done. The trust I had in Liam, in my family, had been shattered beyond repair. The worst part was realizing that there was no going back. Even if Liam came to me and apologized, even if my parents begged for forgiveness, it wouldn't fix what had been broken. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. That person, that family, was gone. I had to learn to rebuild my life piece by piece without them. I had to learn who I was outside of the person they had molded me to be. And that was the hardest part, feeling like I didn't have a place in the world anymore, feeling like I had lost everything that mattered. But I had to keep moving forward. I had no other choice. The truth had come to light, and now I had to live with it. I wasn't the person I used to be, and neither was Liam. We were strangers to each other now, and that was something I couldn't change. All I could do was figure out how to survive in a world that had suddenly turned upside down.